Welcome to Espresso Thoughts, a podcast where we'll carefully deconstruct the world around us to challenge our understanding of the society we live in, and to perhaps help you express your thoughts. My name is Daniel Doe, and in this episode we'll be discussing a highly intriguing and relevant topic that is undoubtedly personal to me, which is the presence of the anti-Asian epidemic that has found itself deeply rooted in both the upcoming Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics and heightened by the current global COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also be discussing these racially motivated attacks and how various elements that may have led to it are portrayed in the media. In particular, we'll be focusing on the language of the former US President Donald Trump. However, our main focus will be on understanding why there has been an upsurge of anti-Asian hate at a societal level. In order to accomplish this, we will use sociological theories, concepts, and related research to further shed light on this topic, and hopefully begin to better understand the ongoing social phenomena around us. There'll be a lot to unpack, so I hope you have a coffee, tea, or any other drink with you. I remember when the COVID-19 pandemic started to feel real for me. It was just this time last year, March 13th, 2020, when the first lockdown was announced in British Columbia. I remember that day and day quite vividly because that was my 21st birthday. This was shortly after reading some Reddit posts made by people who were in the middle of an intense lockdown that was happening in Italy, a country that, at the time, had it worst. All of those personal accounts echoed the same eerie feeling of inevitability, that it was coming and we better be prepared for it. Now, looking back, it truly feels like this pandemic is a notable epoch in human history, where I'll eventually begin to loosely remember things as either before the pandemic or after the pandemic. Nothing has truly felt the same since. But when we take a step back, it is evident that this viral pandemic has been tragically affecting the entire world, and the numbers as of April 2021 make it quite clear. By just looking at the World Health Organization COVID-19 page, there have been over 135 million confirmed cases and nearly 3 million confirmed deaths that have affected 223 countries, areas, or territories. Even when looking closer to home, I'm reminded that Canada is far from unscathed. The Canadian government's outbreak page informs us of the 1 million confirmed cases and 23,000 deaths. And our neighbors down south share the same sentiment, with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention informing us of approximately 31 million cases and 560,000 deaths. These numbers are truly staggering, and I constantly have to remind myself that each of these digits are the felt and intertwined lives of people just like you and me. Although our hearts are heavy for those affected, the presence of vaccines, including the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, marks the beginning of the end to this nightmarish experience we're enduring. With some semblance of optimism, I'm fittingly reminded of former US President Franklin D. Roosevelt's inspiring revelation about us as humans. And I quote, "We have always held to the hope, the belief, the conviction that there is a better life, a better world beyond the horizon." End quote. That is, we are collectively drawn to this infectious idea that beyond our struggles is a glistening future, a universal belief that truly makes us human. This year, the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics will carry an asterisk with it. The Olympics, either summer or winter, being postponed or cancelled is extremely rare. When the modern Olympic Games first began in 1896, this has only happened 6 times, and we're currently about to witness the 6th time. But what makes this upcoming Summer Olympics especially unique is that it will be the first time this will ever have happened for a reason other than war. Regardless, the presence of the biggest sporting event in the world is often celebrated for providing an overarching feeling of unity, as athletes from all around the world come together to compete while fans, in awe, support their nations, their home, with passion and pride. Despite this general sense of unity, there are articles written of division within the Olympics that stand out to me. Experiences held by Sakura Kokumai, Yu Mulder, Chloe Kim, and other Asian American athletes. Sakura Kokumai is a Japanese karate athlete who will be competing in the upcoming Tokyo Olympics for Team USA. She was recently targeted in an anti-Asian hate rant at a park in Orange County, California. She posted some clips of this event on her Instagram. In piecing the videos together, what is understood is that a man had come up to her, yelled at her, insulted her, and threatened her, all while using racial slurs and harsh expletives, telling her to go home. but two things in particular stood out to me about this story. First, it was how Sakura had heard of the rising anti-Asian hate, but never thought it could happen to her. And second, despite the horrible incident, she could not figure out whether the racist tirade itself was worse, or the fact that everyone around her witnessed the incident and did not intervene. Even as an Asian, I currently share the same perspective as her. There's no way this could ever happen to me. But now I can only wonder, if something like this ever did, would anyone even help? I think there's nothing more sobering than realizing your own vulnerability in any situation. On the other hand, Yul Moldar, a South Korean Olympic gymnast who represents Team USA, mentioned how as he was driving last month, a woman had dangerously cut him off. Thereafter, at the next red light, she told him, "Go back to China." This was evidently hard for him to process. Yul competes for the United States, and on Instagram he wrote that, and I quote, "It hurts to know that I have to represent people like her." End quote. Lastly, there's Chloe Kim, the youngest woman to win an Olympic snowboarding gold medal at the age of 17 years old in the Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics. She's a decorated South Korean athlete who represents Team USA. She has spoken out and said that she experiences hate on a daily basis. Chloe gets hundreds of racially charged messages a month and sees nearly 30 a day. Yet she does not blame them and instead says that they weren't born racist or hateful and that they are simply the product of their environment. But that does not change the verbal abuse experienced by her father or the fetishization experienced by her mother. Chloe specifically recalls that even after making the 2018 Olympic team, racism towards Asians was so normalized that people would say racist things to her as jokes, and she would just laugh to avoid the confrontation. One thing that stood out to me was her saying, and I quote, "Even if you get thousands of supportive messages, the hateful one will hit you the most." End quote. And that even despite being applauded by the world as the best in her craft, Chloe Kim is not exempt from racism. These stories of anti-Asian hate have only become more prevalent since the onset of the pandemic. Fortunately, the upcoming Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics and the Asian Olympic athletes that have been both affected by it and have voiced their concerns have been vital in providing awareness for the situation. Like any other form of oppression, it cannot simply be swept under the rug. As I previously mentioned, the uprise of anti-Asian hate reflects a surge in abuse since the onset of the pandemic. In late 2020, the United Nations issued a report that described an alarming level of racially motivated violence and hateful incidents against Asians. An advocacy group called Stop AAPI Hate, in which AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islanders, disclosed that it received over 2,800 reports of hate incidents across the United States last year. These were reports of hateful forms of discrimination ranging between verbal harassment, shunning, physical assault, getting coughed or spat on, and workplace discrimination or service refusal. As a warning, some of these recently reported attacks are extremely graphic. These attacks include an 84-year-old Thai immigrant who died after being violently shoved to the ground during his morning walk in California, an 89-year-old Chinese woman who was slapped and set on fire in New York, and a 61-year-old Filipino-American passenger getting slashed across the face with a box cutter in a New York subway. The list goes on. Some blame this increased anti-Asian rhetoric in America on their former president Donald Trump, who often say that the pandemic was the China virus or the Kung Flu virus. But this does not just affect our neighbors south of our border. We are amidst a huge surge in anti-Asian racism right here in British Columbia, where it has been recently noted that Asian hate crimes have increased by 717% in Vancouver in 2020, as per the Vancouver Police Board. These racist events have consisted of verbal harassment, graffiti, spitting incidents, assault, and more. It is hard to imagine that right here in my community, covert racism is ongoing, and that people like me are subject to racist stereotyping and are under constant fear for their safety. Now that we've contextualized things, we can start looking towards studying and deeply understanding this social phenomenon a bit more by directing our attention towards sociological theories and concepts to guide our thinking. In doing this, we are using what sociologists like to call sociological imagination, which is a term coined by the sociologist Charles Wright Mills. Sociological imagination can be briefly understood as using sociological theories and perspectives to understand more complex sociological phenomena, just like this anti-Asian epidemic. Sociological imagination involves elements of both critical thinking and vigilant skepticism of common sense or taken for granted ways of knowing. Knowing what we've established about sociological imagination, we can attempt to look at racism with a sociological theory to guide our perceptions and understanding of this complex topic. One interesting theory to use is the social process theory of racism and race, discussed by Michelle Bing in the journal article from 2012. The social process theory suggests that racism is a unique social process in which the meanings of race identities are traded across macro, meso, and micro levels of society. The macro social level is where legislation and policies are made. The meso-social level concerns both public discourse and media that collectively constructs public knowledge and common judgment. And the micro-social level is the experiences and the identity negotiations for both individuals and groups. Each of these levels result in a different outcome. At the macro level, racism informs social legislation and policies. At the meso level, racism defines a society's morality. And at a micro level, racism constructs individual experiences. We can focus on two levels in particular, the meso and the micro level. According to Michelle, the meso level in the social process theory is shaped by presidential speeches, news outlets, and social media, among other things. This is relevant because we understand that the former US President Donald Trump is no stranger to including racially charged sentiments in his presidential speeches during the onset of the pandemic. Whether it be through insistently and wrongfully referring to the COVID-19 virus as the China virus or the Kung Flu virus, we can see through social process theory that these claims can subtly inform the meso-level society and subsequently shape both public knowledge and common judgment. It is an understatement to say that the President of the United States is in a position of power, and that their words and perspectives could very easily shape the public perception regarding many things. Although it wouldn't be reasonable to credit Donald Trump with the creation of these racist remarks, I don't think it's unfair to say that he had a role in both familiarizing and popularizing their use. According to Stop AAPI Hate, roughly 30% of anti-Asian incidents between March and August 2020 saw the same use of anti-Chinese and ultimately anti-Asian rhetoric, including the China virus or the Kung Flu virus. Despite this, Donald Trump further doubled down on his inflammatory language by claiming that 100% of Asian Americans would agree with his use of these terms in a following press briefing. However, as social process theory suggests, it is important to realize that this harmful outcome is further exacerbated when the racist, inflammatory remarks made by the president are subtly condoned in major news outlets and media sources. For example, from Fox News, we can see this happening in an article entitled, "Where is China's accountability in the coronavirus crisis?" Holly McKay writes that the pandemic, and I quote, took a dramatic twist with the announcement that President Trump was ill with what he had referred to as the China virus, end quote. Although it is noted that it was his own saying, the author implicitly supports the president's sentiment by avoiding to provide accurate discreditation to his misinformed statements. Holly also ends by writing that some analysts believe that the president testing positive should result in, and I quote, an even more potent push for some level of accountability as to where, how, and why this health catastrophe began, end quote. This could be seen as extremely problematic because the majority of the article directly attributes fault to China. It would not be a stretch to believe that pieces from news outlets that share similar stances to the closing thoughts of this article would aid in the broad audience developing a stance that may thereafter progress to or facilitate an anti-Asian sentiment. Whether it be presidential speeches or news outlets, using sociological imagination allows us to understand the relevance of these situations with social process theory and how that affects the meso level of society proposed by the theory. Furthermore, when we look at the micro level, we can understand it as the level where society's shared understandings of the meanings assigned to race identities are acted out. And it is the level that determines, and I quote from Michelle, which race identities are valorized and which are denigrated, end quote. These anti-Asian hate incidents, whether it be the remarks made against prestigious Asian Olympic athletes or the brutal assaults against Asian civilians, reflect to some degree both the current understandings of society and the acting out of the meanings assigned to the particular race identity of being Asian. Given that in social process theory, racism is depicted as, and I quote, the confluence of meanings from all three levels and the processes of transmitting meanings recursively across social levels, end quote, we can start to see this complex interplay between the macro, meso, and micro levels of society in action, right here, right now. And as I previously touched upon, we can start to understand how elements of the meso level, like the presidential speeches and news outlets, can collaboratively influence the occurrences at the micro level, which is reflected by the upsurge of anti-Asian hate incidents experienced by individuals and Asian racial groups. This upsurge of anti-Asian hate incidents reflect, to some degree, a portion of society's shared understandings of the meanings assigned to being Asian, and are the subsequent actions that have been acted out. Furthermore, beyond understanding the situation through solely the social process theory, we can also begin to look towards particular sociological concepts. I believe that one relevant concept is othering, which is a social phenomenon that can occur in the face of crisis, such as a public health threat, similar to the one we are currently experiencing. Just last year in 2020, Yao Li and Harvey Nicholson Jr. described othering as an action that people may resort to that involves, and I quote, dissociating themselves from the threat and blaming others, other countries, foreigners, stigmatized groups, or other minorities, which helps reduce the powerlessness experienced during the crisis, end quote. Both Yao and Harvey emphasize that you can see this concept of othering in the way diseases are named. For example, we've seen this othering occur previously in history, with syphilis being referred to as the French pox by the English, or as Chinese disease by the Japanese, similar to how we currently see the coronavirus being referred to as the China virus. Through the process of othering, the outgroup, which are the targeted Asians in this case, are depicted as having immoral behavior or cultural norms that are considered as inferior to the in-group, which are the non-Asians in this case. I think one of the most relevant points that Yao and Harvey make is that othering can, and I quote, inspire violent xenophobic reactions, end quote, similar to the influx of the racist attacks we currently see happening towards Asians. To put it simply, we are currently witnessing the othering of Asians all around the world and right here in our very own communities. We've also spent a bit of time looking at the sociological phenomenon through news outlets and sources of media in general. A sociological concept called the spectacle of legitimation can be used to describe media outlets. The spectacle of legitimation addresses how media can legitimize certain ways of thinking about and or understanding broad concepts like gender, citizenship, and in this case, race. This is why it is vital that we should always remain skeptical in our often passive consumption of media. Media holds an inherent capability of constructing or outright shifting narratives that are adopted by its audience. And so although there are equally as many and likely more articles that refute the wrongful claims and sentiments of Donald Trump, it is important to recognize that the articles that promote or even simply stand by and condone these beliefs may legitimize a racist perspective and agenda towards Asians. In conducting our analysis on this sociological phenomenon of anti-Asian hate, we not only can understand the applicability of sociological concepts and theories, but we can also see how sociological theories allow us to organize and piece together our understanding of the world around us. It is far from groundbreaking to say that society is complex or that racism is bad. I'm quite sure that most of us can agree with that. What is groundbreaking, however, is the ability to simplify these complexities within society or to dissect the layers of phenomena that we see around us. That is the capacity and potentiality of sociological imagination, of sociological concepts in general, and of the many sociological theories, like the social process theory, that we've expounded upon. From what started as truly troubling pieces written about the harassment experienced by Olympic athletes, some of which are competing in the upcoming Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics, we've clearly stumbled into an interconnected, complex web of difficult, challenging ideas that can contribute to our understanding of the world around us. We have a better understanding of some of the many factors that contribute to the upsurge of anti-Asian hate that we see happening. We've come a long way and have managed to delve deeply into many topics, including the pandemic, the Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics, Olympic athletes and civilians alike, the anti-Asian hate experiences, the role of politics, the role of the media, and the fundamentality of social processes. And on that note, I would like to leave you with one lasting thought. With regard to anti-Asian hate, it is vital to be cognizant and to realize that it doesn't even matter whether you're of Asian descent or not. Chances are you have someone important in your life who is. Think of them, stand by them, and be vocal with them. We may feel powerless in the presence of adversity that often seems far, far bigger than us, but we must always choose to act in accordance with our values and morals, because to not act is to condone, and to condone is to concede the very values and morals that define you. Regardless, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen. Once again, my name is Daniel Doe, and this has been Espresso Thoughts. I truly wish you all the best, and I hope that this may help you in one way or another to both navigate and express your thoughts. Take care.